Nick Smith. Adventure level 7. Human. American. It hadn't taken us the full week to set out, thanks to Liath's familiarity with the Empire of Calcutta. I only had to wait 3 days before we hit the road. It was much easier to bear than Nash's training. Every time we stopped for lunch, he would drill me on the basics, and then have me attempt to copy his movements. Then he would attack me while I tried to use the movements he demonstrated to parry him. It hadn't gone well, and he was getting grumpier with each failed session. Soon, he would reach a critical mass of grumpiness and either explode or implode, likely taking the whole solar system with him. A supernova or black hole powered completely by grumpiness. Thankfully, our journey was nearing its end, for now at least. The first signs of civilization came into view, and I decided to take a brief nap to speed things along. When I awoke, we were on city streets. Buildings of stone and metal surrounded us, and dwarves were going about their daily routines. Well, mostly dwarves. Every now and then there would be a gnome, orc, or elf doing something, but they were few and far between. It was easy to tell that this was a dwarven city, even without the obvious architecture differences from the other cities I'd been to. "So where are we headed, Liath?" Nash asked. "Figured I'd drop you at the Venator's bureau so you can ask around while I park the cart," our dwarven driver answered. "I'll meet you there once I'm done." "Venator's bureau?" I asked. "Is that like the Adventurers Guild?" "Sort of. The VB is focused on monsters and doesn't usually take requests though. The other big differences are that they only do contracts and don't allow solo adventurers to sign up. You need to be in a party of at least 3 and sign a contract to do work for them." "Why are we asking them questions instead of going to the Adventurers Guild?" "Because the AG is on the whole other fucking side of town," Liath laughed. "Plus the AG is a lot less focused on dungeons around here. They focus more on requests, which usually end up being protection or gathering jobs. That's mostly because the dungeons in Calcutta don't have much treasure, so the profit is strictly in monster guts. So if you want to know all there is to know about dungeons, the VB is your best bet. And here they are." The cart rolled to a stop in front of a building that looked similar to the others, but with a lot more gold trim. Thanks to the tables and chairs off to the side of the building, it gave off a tavern-like aura. We hopped out of the cart and Liath gave us a wave, before he took off down the road again. "Well, the dwarf's logic seems sound," Nash muttered. "Let's find somebody who works here." We entered the building and the tavern vibe immediately intensified. The inside of the Venator's Guild looked almost exactly like the taverns often depicted in video games and anime, right down to the bar and patrons. The only real difference was the amount of gold trim. There was a lot more of it on the inside than there was on the outside. I couldn't tell if we'd walked into a booze hall or a treasure vault. Once a few patrons did their obligatory double takes at my appearance, the room went quiet. Thankfully, it felt more like a shocked silence than a suspicious one. Nash chuckled as we approached the bartender and/or receptionist. The orc behind the bar watched us approach while shuffling some papers. "Greetings," he said. "Pleasure or business?" "Business," I replied. "We'd like information on the dungeons around here." Nash gave me an annoyed glance while I stepped forward and took a seat at the bar. "Yeah, we can do that. You able to read?" "Not any languages that anybody seems to write in," I laughed. "Fair enough. Figured you weren't from around here. You all want a drink while you ask your questions?" "Yes," York said. "Whatever's on tap will be fine." "Any allergies?" We looked at each other and shook our heads. "Good. 4 me's coming up." The bartender busied himself with pouring the drinks, while Nash, York, and Ormira took their seats. I watched as he poured, wondering if I should say anything about my age. After he poured the second glass, all the conditioning my mother had instilled within me finally kicked in. "You know, back home I'm not old enough to drink alcohol," I said. "How old are you?" Ormira asked. 18. Well, last I checked. 18 years old and doesn't know how to parry properly, Nash sighed. Your people must have it pretty damn easy. Is it a cultural taboo or a medical necessity? York asked. Cultural, I think. Legal drinking age in my country is 21, but in other countries it's lower. Plus, the law doesn't prohibit parents giving you alcohol, at least not in my state. Your country has multiple countries? Almira asked. Like an empire? Before I could answer, 4 mugs slid down the bar and slowed to a stop in front of each of us one by one. My eyes widened as the bartender returned to his previous position. Almira and my brothers seemed unimpressed, though. How'd you do that? I asked. Practice, York smirked. So, what are you wanting to know? How many dungeons are nearby? Nash asked. Only the one. It was considered neutralized until just a few hours ago, actually. Neutralized? Well, the last time the dungeon was spewing monsters was over a decade ago. Contractors that went to explore it reported traps and kobolds who seemed to have a leader, but no loot or monsters worth a damn. Kobolds aren't worth anything? Maybe to a collector, but you get a lot more of the good stuff from their bigger cousins, and you don't have to listen to them yap at you. Plenty of folk take issue with hunting things that talk too. Since the kobolds weren't bothering anybody, the decision was made to leave well enough alone. What are the kobolds' bigger cousins? I asked. Reptians and sauroids. Reptians are about as big as I am and have a neurotoxic venom that causes a total body paralysis, which can lead to death via asphyxiation. They travel in groups, have 6-inch claws, and hunt by spitting their venom at their victim and ripping them to shreds once they're paralyzed. Sauroids are much bigger and kinda look like a mix between a kobold and a troll, with a much bigger mouth though. They're solitary ambush predators that usually try to eat their victims whole. Both make for damn good hunts. So why is the dungeon no longer considered neutralized? Nash asked. We've been having a bunch of disappearances. Far more than normal. A couple from here in town, but mostly out on the road near the dungeon. A couple of adventurers found evidence that the victims had been taken into the dungeon, so we sent some of our own to check it out. He gestured over to the corner. My gaze followed his wave and saw a massive orc, 3 dwarves, an elf, and upright lizard that was happily eating a chunk of meat. It was my turn for an obligatory double take. They brought back a kobold that claims the dungeon has been taken over by vampires. At least 7 of them. The Western Wasters are brave, but not stupid. That's far too many vampires for 5 adventurers to handle. They made their way back to report, and we reclassified the dungeon as active. A somber silence settled over us at the mention of vampires. Reizuna spared no detail when he explained what had happened in our absence. My first thought was that the vampire that had led the drow may have taken refuge in the dungeon, but Reizun had said that half-breed vampires aren't able to make more. Something weird is going on here. Do you think the disappearances in town were due to the vampires? Nash asked. I don't know. It's hard to believe that they could make it through the gates, especially since there's a nightly curfew. An odd feeling, like a soft nudge, tugged at the back of my mind. Too many coincidences. We're looking for dungeons that were inhabited by the cult. My brother's homeland was attacked by a vampire, and there's a dungeon with vampires on our first stop. I couldn't shake the feeling that it's been waiting for us, somehow. We should talk to them, I said. I feel like this might be the dungeon we're after. You gonna take a drink of your mead first? Nash grinned. I looked at my untouched mug of mead. My friends back home hadn't been the type to throw parties with booze, so the only time I'd ever had any was the beer my dad shared with me on my 18th birthday. The bitter taste of the beer echoed in my mouth, and I felt my stomach churn. Yeah, of course, I said, picking up the mug. Don't worry, I'll prevent inebriation, Ten said. Thanks. I took a deep breath and chugged the contents of the mug. It was much sweeter than I expected, but it burned a little going down. Once the mug was finished, I set it down and wiped my mouth. Once my sleeve left my mouth, a loud burp forced its way out. Nice, the bartender chuckled. Nash raised his eyebrows as York paid for the drinks. Hope you stay on your feet after that, he said. It'll be fine, York said. We're not going to be heading out immediately. If he ends up drunk, he can sleep it off. If? Yes, it's possible that 10 will intervene. That's cheating, Nash grumbled. Damn, York saw right through me. I pushed the mug towards the bartender with a chuckle and heard a muffled voice. Toxin resistance unlocked. Really? That feels a little cliché. Well, I guess the cliché would be more along the lines of someone with superpowers being unable to get drunk because of a resistance to poisons, rather than unlocking it while drinking. As I tried to think of an example of someone gaining a resistance to toxins from drinking booze, an evil thought occurred to me. I just unlocked a skill, I said innocently. It's called toxin resistance. I stand corrected, Nash replied angrily. That's cheating. The sour expression of my adopted brother turned Trainer's face, filling me with a sick glee. Seeing jealousy twist his features completely made up for all of the recent bruising. York chuckled and shook his head. Well, that's a handy skill to have, he said. I would note that it says resistance rather than immunity, though. I pulled up the skill information and relayed it to them. Toxin resistance allows a user to resist 25% of the negative effects of a poison or venom. It doesn't have a cooldown or duration either, I added. I guess that means it's always active. That does sound like a handy skill to have, the bartender said, grabbing my mug and putting it in the sink behind him. I suddenly became aware of how weird this must look to the poor orc. Something he's never seen before comes up to his bar, asks strangely coincidental questions about dungeons, then downs a mug of mead and gains a new skill. And in the face of these odd events, he's managed to maintain his professionalism. He didn't ask what I am or act suspicious of me at all. To him, I'm just another customer. I reached under my cuirass and pulled a gold coin out of my coin pouch. I placed the coin on the bar and slid it towards him. Thanks for the drinks. You can keep the change, I said. I didn't catch your name. Thank you, he said, smiling as he picked up the coin. The name's Jums. I introduced myself and the rest of my party while they finished their drinks. Jums took our mugs one by one and placed them in the sink that mine had gone in. Well, it's nice to meet you, he said. You're welcome back any time. Oh, we'll definitely be back, I laughed. That meat was pretty good. All right, we should go and have a chat with the Western Wasters, Nash said, sliding off his stool. While they're still somewhat sober, that is. You're right, I replied. Let's go.